Hi and welcome to the latest episode of Dynamics Update. And tonight we're going to speak about 10.0.21. And as usual, I have my colleague Gustav Sundblad with me. Hi, Gustav. How are you today?
Hello, Johan. Thank you. I'm very good today. Thank you. It's been a little while. It's been summer and a lot of backlogs, but I know you have all been busy during the summertime, so it's good to be back and good to be reviewing the documentation and reading up on all the fun stuff again. Right?
Yeah, good to be back. I've missed it, really. All right, so as usual, we are going to go through the in our perspective, most important features of 10.0.21. So I'll let you start this time.
Thank you. I can also add that I know we're a little bit behind here. 21 is coming pretty soon, so hopefully a new episode will be coming shortly, covering version 22. But as you also know, sometimes we pick up things a little bit from this version and that version, so don't be too hung up on the versions. But my first small one, and these are not in any specific priority. It's commerce related, so not that much of a skräll. It's the support of an inventory movement between in-store locations in POS. And this sounds like a reasonable thing to do. What does it mean? What it means is usually because when you deliver something to POS, you normally have one location, like the store. I remember one inventory project I had. They had one inventory location. It was called the Big Pile. And that was everything in the middle of the warehouse floor where everything was, with a pile. There was no control whatsoever. But in the store, usually you have it in the store, but then you need to know exactly where in the store is it. So this is a way to make it easier to use transfer journal capability to drive the movement processing from the commerce headquarters. So let's say that you scan a product that you want to move from a return location to the sales floor, or a damaged location to sales floor, or a very common scenario is to like influencer reserved. So someone is calling in and calling this store and saying this particular item is now reserved for this Instagram photo or whatever. Then you put the item, you put it to that quantity, and it's actually physically reserved at a specific location, making tracking a lot easier, and you can actually do it within the normal POS operation. So it's a nice, nifty little feature coming, I would say. I think it simplifies, and I've seen this demand a lot coming as customizations. So if you're running for it, hold off and please investigate the standard function first.
Yes, all right. So my first one is actually also retail related. And from my perspective, this is a bit fun because this is actually a new commerce store app. So the in-store point of sale app is changing. And I would say that it's changing in a rather big way because prior to this, we've had two different versions of the in-store software. We've had the MPOS, which is a Windows application, those modern ones that you find in the Windows Store. And then we've had something called a Cloud POS. And the Cloud POS is just a web page. And the problem with the Cloud POS has been that if you have a Cloud POS, you can't actually have directly connected hardware to the Cloud POS. You need to have something called a shared hardware station in the store. So you need to have a server which speaks to all of the hardware, all of the cash registers and printers and everything like that. But on the other hand, you're free to have the Cloud POS on basically anything because you can speak directly to something in the store instead. But the difference now is that the new software that is replacing the MPOS is actually the Cloud POS. So what they have done is that they have actually built a wrapper around the Cloud POS and are now distributing it as a store app. So you're running the Cloud POS even though you're installing it on your Windows computer. And the fun stuff here is that it actually has its own hardware station. So even though you're running the Cloud POS, it has its own built-in hardware station, which means that it can actually replace the MPOS, even though it's the Cloud POS. And that means that you only need to build one POS client
Yeah, and for me, if I can iterate onto that, I think this ties also into something we brought up, I think, last time. The independent packaging framework, which we've been discussing, and we've actually been working a little bit with it as well. It's not really ready yet, as far as I can tell. But it goes to that same reason, right? You have one package. You still have to have the package installed, but then you have an extension package with your custom code. That one you can replace, but you cannot run one without the other. So you need to have the deployment and the pipelines. All of that stuff is still applicable. It's just that you need to be aware that the signed package that you produce is an extension Apex package. It's not as it used to be, like a merged MPOS binary package, like you say. So there's a whole big difference here in that that's coming. I would argue that make sure that you test this properly, because we have been running into issues where custom code that you want to merge to this new framework is not ready to be merged. So it looks like it's simple enough in the pipeline, and it looks to be okay. But make sure to run through your normal test cycles, and make sure to reach out to Microsoft product teams as well, because they are very helpful and want to make sure we get this fixed, because it is a new platform, really, a new architecture, and some of the legacy components and legacy customizations will not work without rewriting, basically.
Yeah, you really have a good point here, because first of all, this commerce app is still in preview, so it's not really for production use. But if you're running MPOS today, I would absolutely encourage you to start testing it out. Exactly. Maybe not deploy it in all stores on all point of sale terminals, but I mean, at least use it in your test environment. Maybe you should even try it in like one terminal in each store or something like that. Because the point you're making here is very important, and that is that Microsoft is really, really, really interested in getting feedback on this. And the faster we tell them that something is not working, the faster they can fix it. And the good thing here is they can fix it directly on server side. They don't need to fix the client, because the client is just a web view wrapper, which means that rolling out updates to this client is actually easier than it used to be.
Yeah, that's one little thing to add there is that's a truth with the modification. There are some dependencies to local packages for card terminals, etc. So it's complicated, but the point is that it's moving towards this. And if you have few customizations today within UI and like a very non-customized MPOS version, I think that transition is easier for you than if you have a lot of UI components that are dependent on objects or frameworks that is being deprecated. So the point here is just to make sure to read up on it, because it's also a difference when it comes to code signing, etc. I've been working with this quite a lot lately with good and bad results. But make sure you read and understand and discuss with the Microsoft product teams, because they can help you. But if everything is going well, that it is this way, this is the way they're moving towards. So at some point, you will have to take an action. And the sooner the better, depending on how much resources you have.
Yes, and also the card terminal issue that you brought up here is also a good point to make, because there is actually one card terminal provider which is built in by default. Adyen, exactly. And if you're not using that one, you need to build it on your own. But that is also, if you're thinking about using POS in Dynamics and you haven't really decided on your payment provider yet, I would say that this is actually an argument for going with the one that is built in that case. If there are no other downsides, that should definitely be the default selection in this case, because that's the one that Microsoft will be testing with.
Yeah, I agree, but there is always a reality there with, like, we already have 5,000 stores that have the other ones. Yeah, but you make a good point. If you're starting up or if you're coming from nothing, I mean, then of course you should have a very clear and good argument business-wise to not go with Adyen. But in many cases, especially in Norway, Nordic countries, we have an established,
exactly.
another established competitors that I think that's usually the case where I can see. Point being, don't take it as plug and play. You should never do that anyway. But it's the strategy and the architecture, from my perspective, is valid, and it's the correct way moving forward to avoid issues moving on when it comes to this whole one version. But moving from this usually highly customized solutions that we have, there's a reason retail or commerce did not get locked down at the same time as the backend, because all of the customizations just didn't catch up, right? So with that said, the more we get to the common one version with establishing a routine of extension packaging, everyone is happier. But it's not easy, unfortunately. Been negative enough now, so I can add something. I can just jump into something. Yeah, sure. I can. This might sound a little negative though now when I read it, but no. But I on a personal note, I've been working a lot with different e-commerce and storefront facing solutions connected to ERP. And one personal note is that it's at least a couple of years back, it's always been the same. Whenever you have meetings with these kinds of other POS sales people or other e-commerce like Magento, well, just name a few. I'm not gonna sound like I work at Swedish Radio here. I can't drop names, but my point is ERP from their end has always been like Navision or like Garp. You just send us the ledger. You guys send us the indent table each night and maybe stock on hand, and then we send you the list of orders. And that's also fine. That's one way to do it. And I'm not saying it's bad because it works in many ways. Mainly because these front-end solutions are often built with a different structure. It's easier for them to build flashy and snazzy websites, etc. But commerce as a platform is an entirely different thing. So it requires some explanation to understand, okay, how do you work? Do you really need to have a PIM solution outside of Dynamics? And one thing you usually run into when you have fashion retail, I work with a lot, you have this colors, right? So you have a black shoe, you have a green shoe, you have a red shoe. That's not so complicated. But then you have these colors called Stefan's Fantastic Beach. What color is that? I have no idea. You want to the moon is the color name. Okay, I can guess it's moon colored or maybe gray because it depends on the hairstyle. Point is, it's hard for any system to do some kind of searchable filter on that. Give me all green shoes. Okay, where does Stefan come in? So with that said, you can do it in a number of ways. Mostly PIM systems, they have like base colors, swatches is another, and now there's a functionality to configure product dimension values to appear as swatches. So from the tedious side, then from where I come from, where you want to track everything down to the minimum SKU, they are still following the inventory dimensions: small, medium, large, black and brown, etc. But you can select and you can set them as swatches, and then you get a visual preview of a product's variation. So you can search using like hex colors. So you can group dimensions in that way and call it whatever it needs to be called, but it's still searchable and appearable. Even if you're not using the B2B e-commerce solution, that still helps a lot in any e-commerce solution. If you have that data and if your product team is already doing a lot of that work within Excel, or you don't have a PIM, you can do it in Dynamics. That's one feature I think it looks good. But again, there are of course a number of PIM solutions like InRiver PIM out there that are excellent in this, and they do this all the time. But if you don't have that, and maybe you have this need to start doing this, maybe you should investigate at least the standard functionality in Dynamics first. Requires some work, but then once that work is done, you have a commerce engine available, giving you all across all your channels whatever data you need to brand it, and you can send it to your consignment suppliers or whatever. So I think it's lengthy wording from me here, but I think it's nice, even though Dynamics and commerce is catching up as a commerce solution, so to speak. What commerce has that no other commerce solution has is that it's also a full-blown ERP, so you can have a fully connected experience. I think that's I sound like a salesperson here, but I think it's I think that one was a very nice feature, and I will look forward to working with it to see if it can be done.
All right, so one of the features that I've been talking about a lot in the pod are actually electronic reporting. And in this version, there is, of course, a whole bunch of new electronic reports. But one of the ones that I focused on was mainly because there was a webinar here in Sweden the other week about tax declaration, which doesn't sound that exciting if you're not working with finance, at least. But in this case, it's
not you.
in this case, it's actually even I can think that this is actually exciting, because what it actually comes down to is that it's globalized, standardized VAT declaration flow, which can actually build a VAT declaration and send it all in one go, so to speak, which I think is good. Okay. They actually released this for. I was looking in the library. There was I think there was 10, 12, 15 countries or so, which this is already done in. So I think this is the way to go. I understand that in some cases this standardized version won't work, and that is mainly because something has been differently set up in the back end. But what I think is important when we take a look at these, if you're doing the implementation for Sweden or Norway or wherever, please have a look at these declaration forms first, because it might actually affect how you build your account structure and so on. Because I think it's really important that if we can adjust something on the back end to have these documents work more or less out of the box, I think that is a good thing, because these things tend to drive a lot of work. And also, if you're not aware of these, then you might actually structure things differently just because that's the way you're used to doing things, and not because any reason. It's just the way that you usually do things. But if you could adjust it just a tiny part, which means that it actually fits into this electronic template, I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a very good segue as well over to, I think you mentioned that tax doesn't sound that fun. Yeah, you're speaking to a guy who's been working with customs codes and HS codes for a couple of years now in my career. And I had a standing invitation to the Tullmässa, the general get-together of all customs-related entities in Sweden. I never went. I was going to go there, and it sounds fun. I mean, nice people, nice all around. But in the end, I never went. But I think some of those things are fascinating. All of the calculations and regulations, and especially when you go globally. I mean, you have. I think Indonesia has a different set of GS codes which you need to calculate. So it's all complicated. But one feature which is added here, which I think is nice in version 21, is the post on-hand adjustments using codes connected to offset accounts. So, and this sounds boring, sorry, but it is not. It's whenever you post an inventory adjustment, you usually you set up an offset account based on either item group. There are a number of setup that you can do, and you can select an offset account while they do it. But here it's possible to connect recent codes to both warehouse and retail store workers to do that. So whenever they do an inventory adjustment, which might be stock intake, we didn't receive as much as was expected. You have loss of goods. There are a number of damaged, stolen, expired, and you can assign an offset for each reason. So this is also part of the warehouse management mobile app you mentioned before, I think, giving it the users the reason to do it. And you get much more insight in each, and you get it posted automatically. So you lower the amount of time that the poor people at, accounts receivable, this would be, or accounts payable, doesn't really matter, the finance department, their work gets lowered. And because you always have the most truth at point of happening, at the occurrence, right? If you need to call someone, you posted this as a swin 2 weeks ago. Why? Yeah, let me check my notes. But when you do it automatically and you get it automatically posted, then you can also build workflow for it, and you can build data on it. So efficiency, speed, it's clearer, and it's a much more clear process with a small thing as just adding it. I know a lot of people have customizations for this already, so it's a minor thing, but I really like when you're able to connect codes to offset accounts, because everything is linked to the ledger. Whatever you do in Dynamics, it's always a pre-system to finance.
To connect to your anecdote about the customs fair, I would be punished by. I'm actually doing another podcast once in a while. And one of the guys there, he is a big fan of logistics. So there is a Swedish podcast called Logistikpodden, and he would kill me if I didn't mention Logistikpodden in regards to customs and transports and so on. So
yeah, sounds like he and I would kick it off.
Yeah, it's a really nerdy one. So it's an entire podcast with like 500 episodes.
As opposed to me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the next one on my list is actually a really short one. It has to do with barcodes. So in 10.0.21, we get support for GS1 barcodes, and we also get support for QR codes when it comes to warehouse and inventory and so on. And this was actually brought up by one of my friends, not colleagues and not customers, but actually one of my friends who asked me, when will Dynamics 365 get support for GS1 codes? And it was really nice to be able to say this version that's in preview right now. So what's your next one?
I'll take two at a time, because these are my remaining two ones I have right now. They're quite easy. One is a minor thing, but if you've ever encountered it, it's quite big. It's basically changing change tracking configuration on the retail transaction tables. And anyone who's been working with retail transaction tables know that it's a very, very cumbersome effort to get them out, exported, sent, get them merged. The entities there is no standard composite entity for all retail transactions. You need to build it yourself. There is always a business need to track retail sales, like every minute we need to know how it goes. And until this ADLS storage thing is really up and running, and we see it working in the data warehouses, the most common practice is to bring your own data warehouse and just push out the data or push out the transactions as they come along. And this is working, it's fine, it's stable, until it's not. Because then you have a lot of issues with change tracking retention. If you're relying on change tracking on your retail transaction, and something happens with a log on, log off transaction, which is not really important, but for some reason the retention time kicks in, and then you get a full export. A number of issues here that if you do not have duplicate prevention in place, you need to have a stable process. If you don't, you spend an unnecessary amount of time, maintenance time, to get your transactions out to an external system. You can do it in a number of ways. You can do it within Dynamics, of course, and there are many ways. But this change, which is coming in 10.21, is basically minimizing the amount of change tracking, how much it impacts all of these entities and the underlying tables, because you have a lot of tables which have connections to different other tables, and then the whole enable entire entity export kind of becomes a mess. So I don't have any more technical details on this. I'm really interested in seeing how it looks, so I'm gonna spend some time on that as soon as I get some time over. But in all essence, it's a performance increase for anyone using and relying on the retail transaction sales entities, and it's all of them: the retail transaction entity, fiscal, custom, GT, tax, income and expense, etc. There, it's all of them. It's there. So read up on that one, and if you can, or if you're in the middle of setting this up for the first time, maybe see if you can get a preview or postpone it to 21, so you don't get unnecessary issues. That was my first one, and I'll just jump right into another one, which is related to another fun topic, and I think a peep point of your favorite point of yours, Johan, one of the microservices that we discussed before, the inventory visibility app. And this one is actually not going to see sure how to call it. It's the soft reservation inventory visibility add-in. And I'm not going to go into the visibility add-in. We've done that before, and it's documented. It's a very nice little thing. I recommend you guys to try to use it if you have a business need. But what it does is that whenever an external system would call for on-hand at store A, they can make what is called a soft reservation. So this feature will basically soft reserve it. It's going to deduct the reserve quantity in near real time within the app, to be clear. And then the external system will create a formal sales order. And this sounds like, yes, that's how it should have worked. But for this tells me that now you can really leverage the inventory visibility app as it's supposed to work, because creating and posting an order, reserving it, all of that stuff can be quite slow, or it's batch reliant on the P jobs and all the conversion jobs running in AX or in Dynamics. This soft reserve is where you might have a third-party pool system, or God forbid, another third-party system checking your on-hand and saying, okay, we want to buy this. So it's basically creating demand for us, and then it will convert it to ready to sell. So you can bring in those soft reservations into your MRP calculation, and then if you add on top of that, you add like criteria like prioritized customers, then you really are in a good spot when it comes to order management, order calculation. So I think it's super cool, and I think it's really worth investing time in looking at.
Yes, I would be stupid to not to mention that the fact that if you're curious about the microservices, I'm actually doing a session at DynamicsCon 2021 in September. So if you're curious, just look into that one. I have one short one at the end, and that has to do with feature setup, with status for different new features. Before we've had installed, not installed, preview, and mandatory. There's actually a new one now, and it's called on by default, which means that some features that Microsoft release will actually be set to on by default, which means that they will be turned on, but they won't be mandatory. So that means that you can still turn them off if you want to. And I just want to mention that I guess that some of you will have like a reflex action to turn them off. In this case, I would say do the opposite. If they are on by default, they're probably pretty safe. So just try to test them and keep them on if possible. I know that if things breaks, of course you need to turn them off, but please for my sake, try to keep them to on if possible, because that will make the list of features that you need to test and that you need to verify and that you're having your backlog shorter. And you can bet money on the fact that if they are set to on by default, they will soon become mandatory. All right. So, do you have any last thing to mention?
Not for me. That was it.
No, I have two small things. Visual Studio 2019 is now officially supported in as of 10.0.21. And also, if you're running local business data version, that meaning on-prem version of Dynamics, please wait with using 10.0.21 because there is actually a known bug which is very much highlighted on the release notes. So if you're one of the people who run on-prem, you need to investigate this further, just as a warning.
Very good.
Yes, and with that, we are done for today. I hope you had a nice time, and we will be back really soon with 10.0.22. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.